Hi, this is Dr. Kimberley Linert, and you're listening to Incredible Life Creator Podcast. My guest today is Rod Turner. Rod Turner is a seasoned serial entrepreneur and founder and CEO of Manhattan Street Capital, the #1 growth capital marketplace. He helps CEOs raise capital via IPOs and Regulation A+ for mature startups and mid-sized companies. He is also an expert in M&A. He was a senior executive for 2 successful tech IPOs to the NASDAQ, Symantec and Ashton Tate. Turner has played a key role in building startups to scale, including Symantec Norton, Ashton Tate, Microport, Knowledge Adventure, and more. He is an experienced investor who has built a venture capital business, Irvine Ventures, and has made angel and mezzanine investments in companies such as Bloom, Amyris, Ask Jeeves, and EASIC. He lives in San Diego with his wife and 2 sons. Welcome to the podcast, Rod.
Thank you, Kimberly. It's great to be here.
Yes. So, Rod, you have quite an extensive resume and a lot of experiences in your life. Would you please tell us a little bit about you and like where you started, where you grew up, how you got through that?
Sure. So I grew up on a farm in England, in the southwest of the country, and it was a very nice place to grow up from a quality of life standpoint. Relatively isolated socially, so we tended to value people, which is a nice thing too. And then I became, my first career was as an engineer. I started my apprenticeship at age 15, left home, became a professional engineer on a nuclear power station in the UK. And then I whilst in the UK, moved into selling computers because I wanted to progress my career faster than I could as an engineer, or at least than I thought I could. And then I moved to the US at the age of 23 to further my career. And then I got into startup companies. A year and a half after I arrived in the States, I joined my first startup company, tech company. And then that was kind of a big deal in terms of change of direction. That's when my career began to take off. I had a lot of good fortune. My first startup company was this company, Ashton Tate, that you mentioned. And we went public and on the NASDAQ, and we became the 3rd largest microcomputer software company in the world. Our lead product was called DBase 2, DBase 3. Which was at that time, we built it to be the market leading database on microcomputers. And then I went on to other startup companies. I played a key role in building 6 successful startup companies, including Ashton Tate and Symantec, but others that we took and sold and created liquid outcomes for our investors and for our founders. As well as the venture firm you mentioned. So I've lived in California since I moved to the States. I've always been in California, Southern California, Northern California, Silicon Valley, and San Diego in more recent years. So I feel fortunate in that I have the mind of an engineer, the thought process of an engineer, which I guess causes me to want to be interested in how things are the way they are and how to make them better. And I've been able to learn non-engineering skills, sales and marketing and management and leadership and finance and operations and entrepreneurship. And I feel very fortunate in that respect. It's great to have a broad skill base and to be able to learn new things as I've needed to. Has been super, and I love that.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. So yeah, that is quite a journey from engineering into sales into building companies. Mm-hmm. And you're doing all that, and you also have a family. Mm-hmm. So how does someone as busy as you are and as successful as you are manage having your family and creating really quality family times along with getting things done at work?
I would say I don't consider myself a standout example in that regard. I've had some good luck, partly that my career really kicked into gear around the age 25, 24, 25 is when it kicked off, it accelerated. And I was not married and I wasn't having kids then. I wasn't ready. I wasn't emotionally ready, even if I had met the right woman at the right time. So it was good because I had, during the most intense period when I was traveling lots of the time, gone 50%, 60% of the time, it wasn't impacting my young family because I didn't have one, right?
Mhm.
And then by the time I did settle down, I was already pretty successful financially and business-wise. And so that helped. It helped a great deal, although I was still busy, but I was able to change my priorities around. If I had been, really maxed out in my career at the same time as having, the young children, it would have been more challenging. So a lot of the time when the children were young, I was working from a home office. So I was around a lot. And so, I think I've had it easier than many probably in that respect. It was kind of sequential. I didn't get married till I was 40. And so that helped. It wasn't part of a big master plan. It was kind of the way it evolved. But there's certainly been times more recently, launching this company, my current startup, Manhattan Street Capital, it's a little bit mature now, I suppose, 4.5 years in. And the startup before it, it's been a pretty intense period where I've been working long hours, but I've been able to do it from, near home or a home office a lot of the time. And that's helped. And, so I've basically, my life has been to a large extent, my life has been the kids, my wife, my marriage, working out, and my business, and not much else. Not that much time for other things, but that's life, right? You prioritize what matters most. There have been other times when I was more indulging myself with my friendships and things, and building and nurturing friendships better than I have. I have a lot of friendships through business. I enjoy meeting people and learning from them in business as well as non-business situations. So, I'm kind of a social person. I enjoy all of that.
Yes, yes. And tell me a little bit more about what you're doing now, the Manhattan Street Capital, and
Mm-hmm.
what it does and how it works, like who your customers are.
Mm-hmm. So in the year 2015, the federal securities regulator for stock sales and things, the SEC, introduced Regulation A plus as a rule system as a result of the Jobs Act that was enacted in 2012. And Regulation A plus is pretty cool. It's a really well written regulation, in my opinion. And it enables companies, early stage companies, although I feel like it lends itself more to companies that are a little better established, but it enables companies they're allowed now to market themselves to investors of any wealth level, anywhere around the world, particularly in the US, because that's where the law is enacted. So a company, if it's appealing to investors and if it's doing something worthwhile, it's a very public forum, very transparent access to information, which is the way it should be. So good companies that happen to be in a model, or have a model where what they do is explainable and appeals to regular people, can relatively easily raise capital up to a maximum of 50 million per annum, which is, you could do one every year. So that's a lot of capital, actually. So when that regulation was enacted, I learned about it in March of 2015. Then I decided to launch this company in April. I went live. We launched the company in April of 2015, went live in May as the first dedicated Regulation A plus funding platform. So we help companies do that. We help companies figure out if they should sell shares or debt instruments to investors by this method, by Regulation A plus primarily. And if they want to work with us, we help them to do that and bring in all the different providers, the attorneys, the auditors, the if appropriate broker dealers or underwriters. It's and the marketing agencies, all the different resources that are involved, we bring them all together, we integrate them together, project manage the process, it's a very regulated space, so we're limited as to what we can do. There are things we cannot do. So we live within those rules, and we charge modest fees. The idea, really, in my view, is that we're helping reduce the difficulty and the cost for companies to raise money by selling shares, and helping them access investors that might like what they do. So it's pretty cool. It's very democratic. It's all about, is it a great company? It's not about where is it situated. Are you near a venture hub? Doesn't factor in. Is it led by a minority or led by a woman or what? Doesn't matter. It's all about how great it is. If it's good, it'll, and if it can be explained online effectively, and if it resonates with investors, you'll raise the money, right? It's all about a lot of careful execution. So I like that. And, there's so many companies that need this kind of opportunity. And Reg A Plus has been extended as of December 2018 to allow public companies to do secondary offerings using Reg A Plus. So companies can less expensively do a secondary or another secondary or another secondary whilst they're already public when it makes sense to do so. So that's another neat expansion of its use. Lots of companies can use this successfully. Lots of companies can't either. If it's too complicated, too murky, too boring, then maybe that's not going to fly. But biotech companies, which can really appeal to Main Street investors because they're dealing with horrible things like Alzheimer's or cancer, or addictive pain medicine, they can appeal very strongly. And real estate companies have done very well. Over 60% of the capital raised in Reg A Plus has been for real estate offerings to date. So that is what we do. We help companies with the platform, with all the back-end logistics, as well as with pulling in the service providers and project managing the whole thing to maximize success.
That's wonderful. So you're taking care of the regulations and making sure they're complying so they don't have to be studying the law or trying to figure out what to do.
Yes. We advise and train and orient the CEOs and their management teams. Of course, they still have to toe the line, and they still have to make the effort. And when there's no such thing as 100% perfection, but we're on it and we understand what needs to be done, and we focus their attention on the things that matter, so that they're educated, right? So they don't, it is risky for companies to do it themselves because there's so much to learn. And they don't have a very high success rate. Companies that do it on their own, it's like anything. Go try to fix your car engine. If you're not an expert in fixing car engines, the likelihood of a successful, cost-effective outcome is rather low. So that's how we help. That's where we play a role.
And so let's say there's a company that's wondering if they're a candidate for that. Do you have like a questionnaire they go through or something? How do you decide which companies you can work with and which you can't? I did hear you say that it has to be something that can be sold or that people want or they understand. I got that part.
Yes.
But
yes.
Let's say there's a company that's wondering if they're a good fit.
Yeah, so I'll answer that question in two ways. ManhattanStreetCapital.com, the website, has extensive blogs and FAQ posts. It is I think it's the best source of information about Reg A Plus and raising money and should you do it and how it works and what it costs and how long it takes and so forth. We put a lot of effort into that. So people find us all the time and approach us and ask us, should they do it? What's it like? How's it, ask further questions. So we're a rich resource for companies to self-educate, CFOs and CEOs to go check it out. In addition, but to answer your question directly, because, well, there are really two kinds of companies that can effectively raise money. Those that already have a large following of fans or customers that are very happy with them, because it's very easy for them to reach out and say, hey, we're raising money, would you like to invest? And in order to do that. So the best example that comes to mind for me is a company called VidAngel, where they raised $10 million in about 10 or 12 days online for about 5 days, and then a break of about a week because they had a logistics problem, and then they reopened. In total, 10 or 12 days to raise 10 million from emailing their 30,000 most happy customers, most active customers. So their marketing cost was almost zero, They created a beautiful offering, a great video, and they were and are an interesting company. So that's the most cost-effective marketing example I can lay my hands on. And then when you go to the more regular situation, which is no fan base, or at least a tiny one, you know, small customer base because we haven't built one yet, then in that case, it's more a matter of, okay, is it possible to create an offering page that clearly explains what you do? Is it possible to explain what you do in social media or advertising succinctly? Because if it's so bloody complicated, excuse my language, if it's so complicated that it takes 2 or 3 paragraphs to explain what you do, then probably it's not going to work in social media. You can't grab people's attention with 2 or 3 paragraphs in an ad. It's got to be succinctly explainable. So if it's something we have a cure for Alzheimer's, okay, nobody does yet, right? But that would be a pretty straightforward claim, at least. We have a treatment for AAA negative breast cancer. You know, that's a motivating statement. It's going to get people interested. And then if what they find when they go to the offering page is credible, is appealing, and explained clearly and succinctly, and if the offering is put together in such a way that you don't have to be a rocket scientist to understand it, then we are looking good, right? Real estate is another example where many people understand real estate and would like more exposure to it, but don't have enough money or enough time necessarily to go out and buy another building, you know, or buy another house. So those are examples. Those are good examples. You know, we've helped a biotech company which has a non-addictive, non-opioid-based pain reliever medicine, and its first use is for surgeons to insert where they do surgery. They implant this medicine, and it gradually releases over time. It's in early stage clinical trials, but it gradually releases itself in the body, so the patient, when they go home, don't have to take opioid-based painkillers and get addicted to them and get sedated by them. The pain killing is done where the pain is. So that's a pretty graceful idea, early stage still, right? All those risks, because it's going to take a while to get FDA, if it does get FDA approval. But you can easily explain it, and it appeals, you know, with the opioid epidemic we have going on. So in that case, their cost of marketing has been very low because that company does something that people care about. Main Street investors want to vote with their feet and support that solution, even though it's not guaranteed to succeed, right? So those are examples. Other times, companies, especially in real estate, but there are other examples where they can afford to pay a dividend in today's low interest rate environment. If you can earn 8 or 10%, even better if it's paid monthly, a lot of people would like to invest in that. If they believe in the company underlying it, then it's more about the return, as long as they believe in the company being stable enough, and they're not as hung up then maybe on the details of the company, as long as it's stable enough to deliver that dividend return. So those kinds of things matter. Explainable, does it appeal, is it motivating? You know, if it's a B2B business, okay, that's a bit more of a stretch. If it's a boring B2B business, it's a bigger stretch, you know. So, you know, truck routing software for garbage disposal trucks, probably not going to matter too much to the consumer investor, the Main Street investor. Might be a great company, but that doesn't mean it's going to be easy to explain, or we're going to be easily able to raise the capital for it.
Thanks. And let's say a company is not at the point where they can use your services yet. They're just starting out. So that one company you talked about where they raised up to $10 million, what is their best way to get to that point? You know, I know they want to build a fan base, but is crowdfunding an option, or what?
Well, it depends. It depends. You know, some companies lend themselves to crowdfunding, and they'll be if they can successfully crowdfund themselves, they're probably a very good candidate for using Reg A+, right? The same kind of things apply. If it's appealing to people to donate money in a crowdfunding thing on Kickstarter, then it's probably appealing to regular Main Street investors to invest money too. So that's a great place where it fits. Another one is typically going to friends and family or angel investors, and occasionally early stage venture investors. That's rare. Mostly venture capital investing is done later, where it's already proven.
Mm-hmm.
So mostly it ends up being people that they know, they go build a network or approach their network of friends and colleagues and associates and raise money. That is tough, right? It's always tough to raise money, but it is possible in some situations to do an early stage company in Reg A Plus, but you still have to have the money to spend the money to do it all, because I recommend at least $300,000 up front on hand to pay all the marketing, audit, and other incidental expenses to get going in a Reg A Plus. Of course, you can do it for less, and if you're raising a smaller amount of money, you can do it for less. But it's better to have enough money to do it right. Which does filter out some companies. It's my intention to establish a venture lending fund that will, in select cases, lend money and invest money in companies that are a bit too early to help them do their Reg A pluses. But I have yet to do that. Right, that's an intention. I haven't done it.
Okay. So that's something still you're thinking of. When you said the word marketing, it reminded me of something I read about you about, is it Art Slant?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, where one of the things you did is you increased the site page views by 700%.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought to myself, I bet you the listeners would like to know at least a little secret of something of how you did that.
Well, it was fun. That company, we did everything on a shoestring from the beginning. I wasn't looking for getting back. I had been in a semi-retired state, mentoring, guiding companies. I wasn't looking for a full-time gig, but I ended up joining the company, investing in it, becoming the CEO, and driving all the marketing and a lot of new programs. So there was a lot of fun involved in that. And I would say the biggest things that we did there that gained momentum were reducing the cost of advertising dramatically. So at the beginning, the cost per click was, $30, $40 per art collector and art collector visiting the site, which is pretty expensive stuff. We got it down to probably 5 or 6 cents over time. That was great, right? And that was a lot of fun. The engineer in me was having fun tweaking this and adjusting that and paying close attention to the digital marketing, digital advertising. We established a series of programs, essentially in the art world, Art Slant, contemporary art. It's a lot about who the people that need to make a name for themselves are the unknown artists. They want to emerge from the crowd in order to be able to sell their art, and that's a big challenge. So we provided services to them and to galleries, but mostly it was about providing free services to established artists and established galleries for collectors' benefit, art collectors' benefit, in order to establish a credibility, a critical mass of art, then leveraging that to bring in and encourage emerging artists to spend modest amounts of money, because that's all they have, to promote themselves and advertise themselves on our website, which they did. But to me, the biggest experience, the most fun experience that I had with that, which was a big learning experience, was that a lot of the skills I had learned in other areas, in technology startup companies, businesses, business to business uses, and relatively boring things in some ways, apply directly to this art company. That was fun. Made me feel quite empowered. But also, I had this major breakthrough where we were running ads, emails. We were sending emails out to our ever-growing list of art galleries and collectors, but especially to the emerging artists, because they were the ones that would spend money, modest amounts of it, but would spend money to advertise with us. And I had this amazing experience where we put together a reference email, which showed these 3 emerging artists and how they had had great success using Art Slant. And here's the true story of each of their successes with clickable links to prove it. And it fell on its face. It was abysmally abysmal. It's like I was just blown away that facts and proof didn't cut it, you know. And that was revolutionary for me because it caused me to rethink the pitch, the method, the appeal of those emails that we did typically once a week. I switched away from the facts and went to humor and skepticism, because artists are very intelligent people, and they tend to have a dark side and a skeptical sense of humor, and tend to believe the downside situation too much, probably. So it was amazing. And part of that evolution was going back with the same ad a month or 6 weeks later, where all I did was add the skeptic's question to each of those claims. There was a claim, and then the editorial was, two art shows, I believe one, but two, that's a bit much, don't you think? Adding the skepticism, and it took off. It was just the use of humor. When you get the humor right, it was ballistically successful, off the charts successful, and so much fun. So we did a series then of attempts at humor, many of which worked, and very few offended people. One got a little bit of offense going, but not too much. So that was a blast. It was plumbing humor in marketing to artists was very interesting, quirky thing, but it worked very well.
Yeah, it does sound like a lot of fun.
Yes.
So
yeah, it was Monty Python-esque humor coming out.
Yeah, the emotions still sell, I think. You gotta have the facts, but the emotions still sell.
Emotion, everyone knows that, right? I mean, most people know that logically, and I've experienced it. I had experienced it earlier in my career, where emotion really kicks really well. It's exponentially better. But how do you deliver that? How do you find that? And doing it with humor is so much more difficult than doing it by other means. But sometimes you have no other means available at your disposal. So that was a lot of fun.
Yeah, sounds like it. So as far as people starting businesses or going into a new venture, you seem to have a lot of different interests. There's the art, there's the tech, there's other things. Is it really important that you know the space you're going into really well, or not necessarily to run a company?
Well, it's a bit of both, so in the case of Artsland, I parachuted in and didn't know the space, and at Symantec, we started early on, we started growing by acquisition, and I was leading some of the bigger, most strategic acquisitions where, okay, it's software, but it's a different company in a new space. And I had to parachute in as the local guy, do the combination, make sure that the merger is implemented successfully and carefully, which is itself a serious challenge, but also come up to speed on the market, customers, the competitive landscape quickly, because you don't get a lot of time, and you don't get to do do-overs with this stuff. So I was practiced at that somewhat, and it's fun, it's challenging. So you have to be committed to figuring it out if you're getting into a new business area. But it is, intelligent people who apply themselves can figure it out, because what matters most is there a market? Is there demand for what this company plans to make or makes? And is it a vibrant market of the strategic trends working in favor of this company? Because they have to be. If they're working against it, let's do something else. So doing the right thing at the right time is such a big part of the whole. That's where tremendous success comes from, or doesn't come from, right? So being able to recognize that, and if it means that, okay, I don't know that space enough, but I'm going to figure it out because that's what I got to do, I have to do in order to build this business or become the CEO of it or something. But usually people are building it from scratch, right? That's the more common situation. One should not assume that because you know it and you love it, that it's going to be possible to make a success out of it, because familiarity and comfort with it may or may not have anything to do with, there's a vibrant market, and yes, it's growing beautifully, and yes, you can communicate it. I mean, there are situations where it's almost impossible to communicate a marvelous idea, so you end up not doing it because it wouldn't work. And then there are others where there are unfair advantages. One of our early products at Symantec, I started this division inside Symantec in the early days called Turner Hall Publishing. And one of our early products was a product called Squeeze, which compressed the spreadsheet you could make a spreadsheet, and the spreadsheets would get too big to store on disk, on a floppy disk in those days.
Mm.
And so people would value the ability to compress a spreadsheet down to be smaller so they could take it home on the floppy disk and then work on their home computer. We never ever made a claim that Squeeze would compress the spreadsheets in memory. It did not. We never claimed that it did. We only claimed that it compressed it to store on disk. But people kept on misunderstanding that to our benefit, right? And so it's just like, okay, you know, you're not going to fight it. You go with it. People love the product. It worked great. We didn't get complaints where they were disappointed about that. But that was an unfair advantage that worked to our favor, right? Mm-hmm. And when it works that way, pay attention, love it, live it, you know, indulge yourself, and pay attention when it's the other way around, because you shouldn't do this. You should, you know, probably should do something else.
Yeah. And when you're
I don't know if I answered your question.
Okay. Oh, okay. So when you're putting together a company, whether you know the type of company you're going into or not, what's the importance of a team, and how do you put together the correct team to really get something to go and go to market?
So yeah, I mean, I have so much experience of observing others and of doing this myself and of helping. And when we've acquired companies, the same thing, and being acquired by other companies, I have a lot of learning. So it's the most important thing is to have a balanced set of team dynamics. So, you know, for example, when you are developing software programmers, really great software programmers, especially the ones that are more experienced, they tend to be a bit skeptical, sometimes too skeptical. So managing the dynamics where you have enough enthusiasm to actually get stuff done and enough realism to do it properly and with quality and in a way that's going to work, it becomes critically important. I mean, there are quite a few software companies that screwed themselves up royally by getting the mix of their development team wrong, or by having too large a development team. Ashton Tate, after I left, and part of the reason that I left was that they built a bureaucracy in their software engineering group where they had 70 developers doing what should have been done by 3 or 4, and what used to be done by 1 or 2. And they literally did lose the plot, and the company ended up getting sold for a song because they weren't able to effectively develop their software. Too many people, too much communication. That's a bad dynamic. So you need small enough teams, you know, for efficient communication, and you need the right balance of personalities. You know, it doesn't take long to know when someone's an optimist. And you need that in a sales guy. You need a balanced, reasonable degree of optimism in somebody doing marketing, you know, but in accounts receivable, they got to be skeptical because you can't believe the statement that the check is in the mail. You know, that isn't enough, right? So different skills in different functions and a balance in the whole is critically important. And that's probably the single most important thing, is the right balance of dynamics. Obviously, the right abilities and skill sets, you know, that goes without saying, but team dynamics and the right balance of them are hugely important. When Symantec acquired Peter Norton Computing, I was privileged to be the leader of that merger and to lead the Norton Group within Symantec afterwards, which then became Symantec, and had tremendous success with that merger and with that team. It was a wonderful time. I was so fortunate that the existing development teams were a great enthusiastic bunch, waiting to have more money spent on engineering, waiting to have the opportunity to kick ass. They had been in a cash constrained mode for some time before the combination. So that was such a blessing. So, and there was a point in time where we had, I don't remember, 8 or 10 or 12 different software development projects underway simultaneously, and a major new version of Windows coming out. I mean, my God, the challenges we went through to synchronize the new updates of our utility software with the new version of Windows. But my God, the guys came through. The teams really delivered above and beyond. It was astounding. And it was so much of a fact, so much of it was their optimism and belief, as well as ability to deliver. Not too much skepticism in those teams.
Wow. And I had another question kind of similar. So if Is there a difference between someone who wants to be an entrepreneur, a CEO? I know you said you've mentored business starting up and startups and
Hmm.
people in business.
Hmm.
Is there something that makes a great CEO or makes a great entrepreneur? Is there a difference?
There's a lot of similarities. An entrepreneur can be, the entrepreneurship thing can be front loaded where, after the first couple of years or something, 2 or 3 years, then the entrepreneur brings in a more seasoned CEO to take over the reins, a more operation centric person. Of course, ideally, you want all the skills in one person, that the entrepreneur has the ability to be a great CEO. I tend to think of them as much of a muchness, as one. But if you think about it, I sat next to the president of United Technologies, and they had about 300,000 employees then. This was some time ago, and it was fascinating for me to learn how someone running such a giant business, how do they have an effect?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you've got this giant battleship thing that's moving in one direction, and he said, you don't move it very much; you just tap it. It's about leadership and tapping it in a direction. Whereas as a startup CEO, everything you do matters, right? You're wearing multiple hats. You've got to do everything for a while, and everything you do has huge effect. Sometimes disastrous, sometimes marvelously successful. So a lot of the characteristics are similar, though. And I'm more focused on the early stages anyway. So they come down to some of my philosophies, really. Being real, not allowing oneself to get distracted or distort reality. You've got to know what's actually going on. You've got to know what the customers really think. If you lose a sale, you can't trust that or through osmosis, or that the sales rep's telling you the truth about why you lost the deal, because they may be telling you what they hope is true, or they may be telling you what they think you want to hear. You've got to find out what the facts are. It's like when an employee quits. You can't assume that you know why they quit. You've got to find out. You've got to chat with them one-on-one. Because oftentimes there's stuff you didn't know about going on. And this happens even in small teams. One startup that I was a co-founder of, with about 20 employees, unfortunately, the CEO that we brought in established a head in the sand culture where literally every failure they had, they were hiding from the reality. So thank God we discovered it in time to restart that company. We went down to 3 employees and restarted it and rebuilt it to become a successful company. That was one of my most rewarding successes because of the challenges involved. But it was amazing to me that in a team of 20 people, that you can have a head in the sand attitude promulgated from the top, have a culture like that where they were convincing themselves that it was the competitor's fault. They were giving away the product, or it was a mistake at the client, an enterprise client saying no for the wrong reasons. When we got to the truth of the matter, it was because the software was awful in its current incarnation, and we needed to change it. So we changed it and fixed it. But you can't fix it until you admit what's wrong, right? So reality is big, and as the team grows, staying connected to what's actually going on, not allowing the people who are afraid to give you bad news stuff to get in the way. That tends to be a problem a little further on. But there's so many issues. I think total responsibility is probably one of my bigger ones, where as the CEO, as the entrepreneur, you have to hold yourself accountable for everything. It doesn't matter. Okay, the economy took a dive, so we're having a difficult time. So what are you going to do? How are you going to fix that? How are you going to adjust to handle that? You can't just kill the company or fall apart, fall by the wayside and close the company because life's a bitch. You've got to do your absolute best to pivot, adjust, make it work anyway, right? Pay attention. And if you look, you'll see there are often situations where companies start out doing one thing, and then along the way stuff changes, or they realize it wasn't that great, and they pivot and do the thing that works. It may be completely different than they initially thought. That's okay if you're paying attention. You can pivot and adjust, can't you? You can leverage. A lot of startups make the mistake where they don't look closely at what's going on until they run out of money, and they have to look closely to raise more money. It's too late. You can't raise the money typically then, because you ran out and you've proven that you're not competent. You've got to be asking those questions while you still have money in the bank and you still have runway.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You know, that's such a common mistake is, oh shit, now we have to find out what we did wrong so we can raise more money because we can't get away with just asking them for money. And then we
Yeah, so
that's a classic example of paying attention, really paying attention and using your initiative and taking total responsibility. They're kind of the most important ingredients in successfully building and growing businesses. You gotta be paying attention. You gotta be prepared to pivot. You have to pivot. You just in the early days at Symantec, for example, I think a large chunk of the company just got sold to Broadcom for 10 or 12 billion dollars or something. Big deal. It's a shame in a way. I kind of preferred it when it was a standalone successful company. Two companies now. There's a sustaining bit and a sold bit. But in the beginning, we raised venture money at a pre-money valuation of $8 million for that company. That was a valuation that the VCs invested at, which was a reasonable price at the time, especially given that it's gone up, you know, so much in subsequent years. But we launched the first product, and 3 months in, sales were 1/3 what they needed to be. We were losing money. We needed more venture capital. The VCs, the lead venture firm, Kleiner Perkins, said, if you get the company to break even, we'll go to bat for you. We'll back you. We'll put in more money. So we did. We made a slight headcount reduction. We renegotiated the lease for the building. We were in too big a building. Got a deal to push off the lease payments to the future to reduce the current expense. And everyone took a pay cut. The CEO and the chairman took 100% pay cut. The VPs took a 50% pay cut, and the rest of the employees took a 15% pay cut. And that actually motivated everyone because we're all suffering here, and they're suffering more at the top, right? It was a team building thing. We did a bunch of neat things to rebuild momentum and establish success, and we brought in fresh venture capital, and we ended up making the company successful. But I'll never forget my roommate at that time, who was this guy Mike, who was the director of sales, reporting to me and sharing a condo with me, an apartment with me. He leased a brand new BMW right after we put that program in place because he was an optimist, right? You've got to be. He's a sales guy. You know, you walk through walls when you're a sales guy. You believe in the positive outcome. Mm-hmm. So, and it worked out. He worked out fine. You know, there was no way I would have bought a new car. I had a nice old car. I had two. I had a little English sports car and an old Mercedes. They were fine. I wasn't going to shell out more money at that point in time. Mm-hmm. But we made it happen, you know. And it was easy a few years later when we went public for everyone to say, oh my God, another overnight success. It wasn't an easy overnight success. It took us years to get to that point.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
That's the way it often is.
Sounds like even through the hardship, that creativity is what got you out of it by actually just being so creative and thinking of every area where you could change something.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we did amazing things. You know, we had this 6-pack program in that critical period where it was inspired by a product called the AST 6-pack. It was a popular product name. And working 6 days a week, visiting 6 dealers a day, selling them or training them, and staying at Motel 6 for low costs of travel. Mm-hmm. So that was fun. And we did other things. We did a lot of neat promotional things around that. Had a marvelous marketing agency that came in. They were a startup agency. They were kicking ass. We did amazing fun things. Mm-hmm. So it was a lot of combined practices. Every employee went out selling and training. Every employee. It didn't matter what their role was, because it doesn't matter if you can do software development if the company shut its doors, right? Mm-hmm. And for many years afterwards, I'd meet people in dealerships who had met with the programmer who did the word processor, or the marketing communications lady who was out selling, and she became a salesperson later, actually. But yeah, so it was a lot of fun, and it was, necessity is the mother of invention, right? Uh-huh. You do what you got to do as long as it's allowed.
Yes, it does sound like a lot of fun. And I kind of switch gears when you're talking about employees. Let's say that you don't really want to be a CEO. You'd rather just find a great company and work for that mm-hmm. company. What's the best way to ace the interview, or, find a company that, would be ideal to work for, that's, a
Up
company
your alley.
doing well, and how would you go to the interview and sell yourself?
So I have a lot of beliefs around that. And this is both for figuring out a career direction when you know you want to do something dynamic, but also finding a great job, a great career. Um, I'm definitely biased by it. I'm biased away from bureaucracies, I'm biased away from giant companies, because that's not where the great growth comes from. If you're a young person, or even medium in your middle of your career, and you want a rapid progression, that is unlikely to happen in a company that's growing 3.5% a year, maybe even 8% a year. This is boring stuff. When you join a company that's doubling, trebling, or quadrupling every year, because they are at that stage where they have success, they are hiring left, right, and center. Life's a bitch. I've been there. I've done that. It's fun. The most difficult thing is hiring great people. It's the most difficult thing, to find great people in a timely manner, because you're always short-staffed. Just the act of advertising and interviewing takes more time, but you don't have that time. So that is where opportunity lies. So identifying the companies that are in a field that is growing, and they are succeeding, and they're growing very rapidly. So they're typically in the 20 to 80 employee range. Companies of that size are where rapid growth can occur. Typically not yesterday's startup. They've been around for a bit. They were able to raise some capital. They were able to create product. They're on the third release. This one's starting to take off. That is the ideal time to join them. So identifying such companies, you can use web metrics software to track companies' sites. If you know of companies in the field, you go check them all out. Use SEMrush, SEMrush for free. You can track the rapid growth of metrics. So it's a company that's in a space, but their trend is boringly flat. Okay, not too hot. A company that went like this and is now going ballistic. It's hard not to notice that when you look, right? Mm-hmm. So those kinds of things. So you identify companies that are in fields that are growing rapidly. You can search for that stuff online, and there's a lot of good sources that are doing things that are interesting, like AI, machine learning today, and obviously virtual reality, augmented reality, technologies that are obviously taking off. And look within to see the companies that are doing well in those spaces. That's what I did when I found Ashton Tate, my first startup. It took me ages to figure it out, but I figured out microcomputer software was the place to be in that time. And then I looked at all the movers and shakers in microcomputer software, and I interviewed with a bunch of them, and a few of them offered me jobs, and the one that fit was Ashton Tate. I was their 12th employee. If they had been venture funded, they wouldn't have hired me, because I didn't have the proof that I could do it. I had abilities that I could show, but no proof. And I approached them out of the blue. They weren't even advertising, right? Mm-hmm. That's what you do. You find great companies, they're hungry, and you approach them out of the blue because they may need you, and you end up having conversations and showing yourself to be different because you took that approach. Then when you're in the interview, some very obvious stuff. Be open, be candid. The biggest mistake people make is to try and put such a spin on themselves that they're bullshitting, or they're not open, they're not honest. You can't interview someone if they're not open. You're not getting it. You're not getting the scoop, so it's a waste of time, right? Mm-hmm. I won't dream of hiring someone if I can't figure out who they really are, obviously, and any experienced manager will feel the same way. But so it's about being open and transparent. It's about having checked the company out first and asking questions. I'm astounded how few people ask questions. It's like they feel too humble. They feel like it's above their grade or something to ask questions. But you show interest, you show engagement, you show intellect, and you show an understanding of the company and its business when you ask questions, and then follow-up questions, right? That's how you distinguish yourself, and you show your ability and your innate intelligence and stuff. So those are the big things for me in interviews that people tend to miss out on.
Wow. Well, thank you for all the information on the companies. I want to switch gears a little. So just back to just life in general. What are the things in your life that give you the most happiness, the most joy, the most fulfillment?
So my kids, I have two sons. One is 14, the other is 22. it's fair to say I had no idea how difficult it would be being a dad, being a parent. Um, but it's been so incredibly rewarding, and they are my life, right? I mean, anyone who's got kids knows that they become your life. They become more important to you than yourself. So it's a wonderful, wonderful journey. That right there, that's the biggest thing. And a shocker, because I was a guy, I was afraid of commitment, and I knew, yeah, of course, I'll get married, I'll have kids, but I didn't have a clue what that entailed. Beyond that, I would say enabling others to be their best, to be myself, to be my best self. But that's been of necessity, right? To overcome my pitfalls to the extent I've been able to figure out what the hell they are, overcome them, to grow myself, but to help others. So there's been some amazingly wonderful things where people and teams that I was responsible for did unbelievably great things where, really I was asking too much, but we pulled it off.
Mm-hmm.
And people feel so good when they do. And even me, this unbelievably unreasonable taskmaster, I come out looking good then because we did it. We accomplished it,
Mm-hmm.
I've had people come back to me, when I'm challenging them too much and say, Rod, we're a bit confused about what you're looking for. What they really mean is it's too much. What are you saying? But anyway, it's been wonderful when we've done what seemed impossible,
Mm-hmm.
I've had some lovely experiences with that where preparedness meets opportunity, and we really delivered.
Mm-hmm.
Beautiful, beautiful experiences. And I think it's helping others be their best, and and obviously being myself my best, but it's more about helping others. I get a great kick out of that. When people work with me and I can help them identify things that are holding them back and overcome those things, I'm about that. That's peculiar to me for some reason.
Awesome. And any last words of advice, any advice at all on life, on business?
Well, there's so much, but I would say, people say do follow your passion, which is lovely if that works, right? But following your passion can take you into a cul-de-sac of a job or a cul-de-sac of a career or business. So I don't support that. But being real, paying attention, and figuring out what does motivate you. So as an example, if there's time here, as a kid, I would watch car racing with my dad and boxing, those two things. And I love both. And I wanted to be a race car driver. I had no clue if I had ability, but I wanted to. Years later, when I got into a semi-retired mode for a few years, I bumped into a guy that was doing amateur road racing of cars. And I learned from him that there was an open house coming up at a racetrack, and there was a racetrack. It wasn't too far. I went there and said, oh shit, I could do this. So I ended up taking race driving classes, renting a race car, buying a race car, and spent 4 years of every waking moment in my spare time racing and having a blast and pushing the limits of the car and my own limits. And wonderful. The point here is that I had a passion for car racing. I knew that, but looking back, it's unbelievable the energy that I had because I was pursuing my passion. So finding a passion that you can usefully apply it in a way that works. If it's helping others, then do that. Maybe that's not going to make you a living. It'll make you fulfilled. But identifying your passion and going after it does matter greatly. And if you can meld it into a passion where you make a living out of it, so much the better, right?
Yes. Yes. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast today and for all your
You're
wisdom.
welcome.
And
thank you.
Very exciting what you're doing. I just loved listening, and we'll hopefully talk to you again another day.
Yeah, look forward to that. Thank you very much for having me on. I hope that the audience enjoyed this and that I've been of some help to them. And thanks very much for having me, Kimberley.